Okay, so the setting, as you can see, is
Joshua 2, 1 through 21.
And so before his death, Moses had commissioned Joshua to be his successor. And under this new leadership, the Israelites camped on the eastern side of the Jordan River. And so they were positioned to invade the promised land, basically. So Joshua was a wise military leader, and he defeated the Amalekites and the Amorites. As the new commander-in-chief, he prepared to bring his armies across the Jordan for basically a full-scale invasion of the land. And he wanted some intel about his enemies. So there was no sophisticated means of surveillance in those days, obviously, so Joshua needed feet on the ground. He needed eyes and ears that could give him first-hand report on the strength and the disposition of his enemies. So he sent 2 spies to view the land, especially the city of Jericho. Now, under the cover of darkness, they entered the city, right? To avoid suspicion, they went into the house of a prostitute named Rahab. And so they could not realize the impact their cross-cultural encounter with this woman of ill reputation would have on them, their army, and the future of Israel, and God's redemptive plan for mankind. So, how many of you have a relative that is difficult to explain? How many of you are that relative that is difficult to explain? Right? So there are people who are genealogists who can take someone's life and kind of work it and reshape it just by changing a few words here and there, right? And they make it sound glorious. So, for example, there was a man who found out. This thing changed now. Okay, there it is. Okay, so there was a man who found out that his great uncle Remus Starr was a man with no moral character. He was hanged for horse stealing and train robbery in Montana in 1889. Now, on the back of the only known photograph of Remus, which showed him standing on the gallows, are the words, Remus Starr, horse thief, sent to Montana Territorial Prison, 1885. Escaped, 1887. Robbed the Montana Flyer 6 times. Caught by the Pinkerton detectives. Convicted and hanged in 1889. Now, how in the world can you remake his life and image look good? Well, the genealogist took that same information and he reworked it, and it read like this. Remus Starr was a famous cowboy in Montana Territory. His business empire grew to include acquisition of valuable equestrian assets and intimate dealings with the Montana Railroad. And so beginning in 1885, he devoted several years of his life to service at a government facility, finally taking leave to resume his dealings with the railroad. In 1887, he was a key player in a vital investigation run by the renowned Pinkerton Detective Agency. In 1889, Uncle Remus passed away during an important civic function held in his honor when the platform upon which he was standing collapsed. There it is. So Rahab was one of those relatives that was difficult to explain. Why? Well, Rahab was a Canaanite, not a Jew. There's our intercultural. The Canaanites were a wicked people, and a people so wicked and so evil that God had to use Israel as his instrument to judge them. And so the Canaanites were idolaters, as we know. So strike one, Rahab was a woman. Women, as we know at that time, were often treated as second-class people. They had few rights, yet God worked through this woman. Rahab, strike 2, was a prostitute. She sold herself for money. Strike 3, God sees potential in every single one of us. So no matter what our past, the key in this story isn't Rahab's past, it's her faith and the future that God is going to create for her. So the story is pretty simple. Rahab is a story of God's grace. It is not a story of a good person deserving salvation. So Rahab is identified in the Bible 5 times as a prostitute. God wants to teach us a very important lesson in this story. So he can use Rahab. He can redeem Rahab. He can use anyone. He can redeem anyone. So Rahab's story gives hope to every sinner that they too can be redeemed and fit into God's plan. Now, the story of Rahab and the spies may be likened to a drama with 3 acts. In each, Rahab is the main player. Note, we are not told the name of the king of Jericho, nor do we know the name of the two spies. So apart from Joshua, the only character mentioned by name is Rahab. Okay? The hero of this mini story is not a soldier, not an Israelite, and not even a he. So before their faith is tested out in the battlefield, the Israelites learn a lesson in the most unlikely place, right? Hiding in a pile of flax with an uncertain fate, resting in the hands of a prostitute, Canaanite, living this dubious lifestyle. So their concept of God and faith is, as it were, I like this, the scholar said, rehabilitated. Okay, so verse 1. I got the intro. So verse 1. Then Joshua the son of Nun secretly sent 2 spies from Shittim. Go look over the land, he said, especially Jericho. So they went and entered the house of a prostitute named Rahab, and they stayed there. So Joshua takes the initiative. So in the text, there's no evidence that God told Joshua to send spies into the land. Now God told him to get ready to cross the Jordan River. It seems that in Joshua's mind, sending spies was one way of getting ready. Joshua sent out 2 spies. Why? Well, Deuteronomy 19 says, by the mouth of 2 witnesses, every word will be established. So General Joshua wants to find out what's going on that other side, right, of the Jordan River. The question is, why did Joshua send out just 2 spies when Moses, years earlier, sent out 12 spies? Well, the Bible is clear. He sent out 12 spies, and 10 of them, remember, came back with a bad report. Only 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, had a good report. What's the big deal? Well, the bad report spread so that the people of Israel would not believe in God's promise. So Joshua now says, forget the 10. All I need is a few good men. Just 2. So another question, why Jericho? Why is that the first city? Well, if you are positioned on the Jordan River, that would be the first city geographically that you would see right in front of you. But there could be another reason, especially in this story. God wanted to reach a woman. And so they needed to get to Jericho for that to happen. So Rahab's status, she is a prostitute, a streetwalker, a woman of the night, a madam, a harlot. Now the Babylonian Talmud, that's it right there, the Babylonian Talmud, says that just the mention of her name could cause the speaker to be sexually aroused. Right? So how many of you have ever met someone named Rahab? It's not a common name. So few people name their children Rahab. I mean, there's probably someone out there, just like, who do you know that's named Judas? It's another one. Okay. And so, moving forward, Rahab is identified as a harlot multiple times. Many commentators who write about the book of Joshua, they try to sanitize Rahab and say, well, maybe she wasn't really an actual prostitute. The word in Hebrew is a little fuzzy. And so maybe she was just an innkeeper, right? So if Rahab was merely an innkeeper, the point would not be nearly memorable. And so the Greek word for harlot is porneia, where we get the word pornography from. And so porneia always and only means, when it is used in that form, a harlot, prostitute. Now the Hebrew word, I have it down here at the bottom, is zona, okay, which means harlot. And so these words make it very clear that Rahab is what the Bible says she was. So we don't need to try to brush over her sins, right? Even a holy nation like Israel had prostitutes. And so here, Rahab the monster, not the harlot. Okay? Psalms 89:10. You crushed the monster Rahab and killed it. With your mighty strength, you defeated your enemies. Okay, so there's 2 Rahabs in the Bible. You got to be careful. Rahab the monster or Rahab the harlot. So here we have, I put there in the yellow arrow, I can't see, so I have to bend over. Rahab, a poetical name of Egypt, probably of Egyptian origin, but accommodated to the Hebrew language. And then over here in the second arrow, Isaiah called Egypt the reclining sea monster. Rahab, Hem Shabet, literally the sitting Rahab. Rahab the do nothing. There it is, right? In our biblical text. Here's another one. Isaiah refers to the parting of the Red Sea by poetically referring to this myth. Awake, awake, clothe yourself with strength, O arm of the Lord. Awake as in the days gone by, as in the generations of old. Was it not you who cut Rahab to pieces? Right? And here we have Job 26. By his power, he churned up the sea. By his wisdom, he cut Rahab to pieces. So Rahab can mean many things. It means the Canaanites, the Egyptians, other things, harlots. And so, moving forward here, a pagan place like Jericho would surely have many of these prostitutes. Now, one scholar by the name of Herbert Lockyer writes on this, and he says, both Jewish and Christian writers have tried to prove that Rahab was a different woman from the one whom the Bible always speaks of as a harlot. To them, it's abhorrent that such a disreputable person could be included in the Lord's genealogy. But let's be honest, respectable people are uncomfortable with God choosing a prostitute. Surely there's a better people in Jericho than Rahab. How about the king of the city, or the mayor, or the judges at the gate? And that's end of quote, right? So somebody of finer reputation is the idea. If God were going to destroy San Antonio and save only one person, who would he choose? Right? A police officer, a fireman, the mayor, a person of well known in the community, maybe a prominent pastor, right? But if we follow this story, maybe the one person he would choose would be a crack addicted prostitute or a homeless person or an ex-criminal or a even current criminal. So Rahab's status is important in this story. And so we need to identify what it is she is, right? And so one thing for certain, Rahab was an outsider. Now, according to one female scholar, Jenny Williams, she put it this way. She was living on the edge. Prostitutes are never part of mainstream society. They are tolerated, but not accepted. Another female scholar, Carolyn Pressler, wrote, they were not outlawed, but were outcast, right? So Rahab did not belong to Jericho's civic society, basically. So perhaps this made it easier for her to kind of switch sides, right? And betray her city. And the scholar Pressler, she continues to say, it is not implausible that a destitute woman like Rahab would identify more with the poor Israelites than with the rich lords of Jericho. And so another issue is, did Joshua send the spies secretly, or did Joshua send them to spy secretly? See? That's a translation issue. And so one could conclude from this syntactical question will affect one's reading and understanding of the rest of the story. So was Joshua afraid, doubting, and faithless in sending the spies into Canaan? Or was Joshua astute, cautious, courageous in sending out these men? Now the traits of fear, doubt, or faithlessness are not with the idea of the character that we know as Joshua. So we can kind of, explain on that. And so we've read about Joshua in Exodus and Numbers and Deuteronomy. He doesn't sound like no coward, right? He never sounds faithless. So the idea is for the reader to recall the seduction that fell before Israel in Numbers 25. So you remember every time the writers write, why does he mention Israel? Because look what happened. While Israel was staying in Shittim, the men began to indulge in sexual immorality with Moabite women. See, the things that in the Bible are not just there, they're there for a reason, right? However, given the Lord's commission to Joshua in chapter 1, God says, arise, go over this Jordan, you and all this people, into the land that I am giving you, right? So you would think that the natural outcome would be to get up and just go over. God already said go over it, right? Why do you want to delay it? Why are you trying to delay God's plan by sending out some scouts that God never asked you to, right? It's kind of like, that's why they say, was he doubting, right? And so this is the first of two occasions in which Joshua sends out spies. But in neither is there a divine mandate. God never told him to. He told Moses, but he didn't tell Joshua. He's probably saying, Joshua, I thought you would have learned by now, right? So the other occasion is before the battle with Ai. Remember that in Joshua chapter 7, which Joshua, again, he neglects to seek God's guidance. So in Numbers 13, God told the Israelites to send tribal representatives into the land of Canaan. But in that mission, Joshua himself participated, but it was initiated by God. That's the difference, right? And so why did he send the spies? Well, the Lord had already promised to send the angel ahead of them, right? No problem. You got the angel of God with them to go before them into the land and blot out these inhabitants. Now, some conclude that Joshua was wavering right from the start in trusting this divine plan. So if this is true, then Joshua hoped to gain confidence through military strategy, right? So this recon mission would actually be a mistake. Why? Well, the spies get caught with a prostitute. They are locked inside the city gate, and they are preserved only at her mercy. Not a very good idea. And there's no reason to believe that they were able to accomplish the work as they were running for the hills. Some spies, right? And then, to top it all off, they report back to Joshua, the Lord has surely given us the whole land, right? All the people are melting in fear because of us. And it's like if they're saying, at least that's what this Canaanite woman keeps going on about, right? So the two spies trusted the words of Rahab. And so as the Israelite spies in the story, dig themselves deeper and deeper in trouble, Rahab, who has been presented to us as a woman of ill repute, rises higher and higher, right? In our estimation, especially in her faith. She started weak and she just keeps going up and up. So verse 2 says, the king of Jericho was told, look, some of the Israelites have come here tonight to spy out on the land. Now the circumstance is immediately brought to the attention of the king, who was informed not only of the spies, but the whereabouts and the nature of their mission. So this raises the question, what kind of spies are these, right? These men seem to be on a more of a reconnaissance job than an espionage mission. However, secretive or not, their mission might be, it is in their interest, obviously, to avoid contact with civic officials. But any attempt at secrecy basically failed because everybody knows they're there now. So what is this? So because the next verse indicates that the king was alerted to the presence of the spies. So this may be an example of humor in the narrative, right? Now, David Firth, this guy here, he's a scholar, suggests the spying may have been kept a secret from the Israelites rather than the Canaanites, since it is assumed spies are not to be found out by the enemy. That's a good observation, good conclusion. So verse 3 goes on to say, so the king of Jericho sent this message to Rahab, bring out the men who came to you and enter your house, because they have come to spy out the whole land. And so the text leads the reader to understand that the mission of the spies was known to the enemy at the highest levels, right? It was treason against Jericho and its king to aid these men. So Rahab's helpful deeds indicate basically her renunciation of allegiance to the Canaanites and her acceptance of the rulership of Joshua and his spies and his God. Now, 4 and 5 I'm going to read together. But the woman had taken 2 men and hidden them. She said, yes, the men came to me, but I don't know where they had come from. Verse 5, at dusk, when it was time to close the city gate, they left. I don't know why, which way they went. Go after them quickly. You may catch up with them. Now, the question, did Rahab lie? Yes. Are there times when we should lie for a good reason? Lying is sin with no exceptions, obviously. It's not surprising that she lied considering the lifestyle she leads, right? In her environment, her culture. They were used to lying. We saw Laban yesterday, right? She was beginning to show faith in God, but that didn't mean her choices were immediately right or she would be perfect right away, right? In this case, the lie seems to be well-intentioned. Although God was beginning to work in her, she was still heavily influenced by her culture, right? She did not yet learn of God's perfect holiness and hatred of every type of sin. She's still learning, just like us when we became Christians at the beginning. She had not been taught the scriptures, right? But nonetheless, it was sin. So some sins are committed in ignorance with good motivations, but some sins are committed intentionally. Now, do you know what all 3 have in common? They are sin. Rahab put others first. She took a great risk in sheltering the spies and hiding them. Although her lying wasn't the right way to handle it, it does show that she was willing to die for her belief that God would give victory to the Israelites over her own people. And so she was willing to sacrifice her life for her belief in this new God that she heard of. So basically, she joined God's team. Hey, right? So this came at a great risk to herself, because if her people would find out, she could be executed for treason, right? And so there are occasions in the Bible where righteous people lie to wicked people for God's greater good. So it is God's greater good is not condemned as sin. However, we have also agreed that God is truth, and lying for selfish gain or unjust outcomes is sin. Therefore, to be clear, the only exception for righteous lie is God's greater good, not ours. See, that's the whole point. It's for God's greater good, not our greater good. Okay? And so any lie is sinful unless it's done to protect an innocent party from a wicked person with wicked motives. Okay? So scholar Sam Storm describes it like this: a lie is an intentional falsehood that violates someone's right to know the truth. But there are cases in which people forfeit their right to know the truth. Right? That even happens to us, when we're trying to preach the gospel. So did Rahab lie to the glory of God by protecting the spies from the soldiers of Jericho? Yes, exactly. She told a lie to wicked people to save the righteous for God's greater good, not her own. That's the difference. A more modern example would be if I lived in Europe during World War II and I was hiding Jews in my house, and a Nazi soldier came to my door and searched for them, I would tell a lie to save their lives. Right? We need to distinguish between what the Bible reports and what it recommends, or between what it records and what it requires. So there's a difference. So this is the difference between descriptive and prescriptive, right? So a good example of this is found in the book of Job, where the words of Job's counselors are reported and recorded, but are by no means approved or endorsed, right? Their theology was bad and their counsel was misguided. So perhaps we should simply take this as another example of the Bible recording her actions, but not necessarily approving them. Okay, so we must remember that communication of truth or falsehood can also be nonverbal. How? Through our actions, right? Through our conduct. And so, for example, is it ethical for a Christian to post a beware of the dog sign on your fence or door, right, to deter a burglar when you don't even have a dog? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ethical question, right? Is it ethical for a Christian to give the impression that one is at home by leaving the lights on? That's what we get. To frighten off a would-be intruder or thief? Is it ethical for the police to conduct undercover plainclothes investigations, which by definition demand that they deceive people concerning their identity and their intent? These are ethical questions. I taught at BUA ethical class. Is it ethical for those in the military to wear camouflage uniforms in order to mislead their enemies concerning their location? Right? You'll be dreaming about that tonight. Is it ethical?
Are you going to give us the answer?
Verse 6. No, I'm not going to give the answer. That's on you. Verse 6. But she had taken them up to the roof and hidden them under the stalks of flax that she had laid on the roof. And so, if we were watching this scene in a movie and she is talking, the camera, would slowly go to the pile of flax stalks on the roof, and we see a set of 4 eyes, right, peeking through. So not only does Rahab play dumb, she says, I don't know anything, to the men, she shows initiative in getting the king's men far, far away from the 2 spies. Pursue them quickly, for you can overtake them, right? Since it is unlikely that cultivated flax was grown in that area at that particular time, this was probably the wild flax that was collected in the earlier part of the northern spring. And so these stalks would not have provided enough cover for them. If the king's officers would have gone in there, they would have probably seen them, according to this archaeological reading, but would have provided enough cover just to conceal them, maybe from the neighbor looking over, right? That would make more sense. And so verse 7 says, so the men set out in pursuit of the spies on the road that leads to the fords of the Jordan. And as soon as the pursuers had gone out, the gate was shut. So, in terms of narrative, the reader may either form a favorable impression of Rahab's character or judge the civic officials to be very gullible, right? And find some humor in the speed in which they basically ran out just on the word of a prostitute, right? Think about that, right? Just on her counsel. They didn't investigate. They didn't go look into her home. They just believed the word of a prostitute. Great. So the fords might be what they called sandbars, known today as the Almactas. Okay, there's the Almactas. 8 miles southeast of Jericho. Rahab said that the city gate was already shut, so it is implied that the gate was open for the king's men to go out and then to come back. So this detail is very important, and the writer mentioned it so the reader knows that there's no easy way that these guys, these two spies, are going to get out, right? They're not going to be able to escape. And so they are basically dependent on Rahab for protection. Okay, so verse 8 and 9 says, before the spies lay down for the night, she went up the roof and said to them, I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that a great fear of you has fallen on us, so that all who live in this country are melting in fear because of you. Now, notice that she did not say, men, I think, or I hope. She said, I know, right? I know that the Lord has given you the land. So the word Lord here is capitalized. That means that she's using the covenant name of God. So here in the Greek, this is the Greek Septuagint. Remember I mentioned it's older than the Hebrew. Kurios, the Kurios, or the Lord, right? And here we have the name Yahweh, or what we call the tetragrammaton, meaning the 4, letters, so to speak. And so this is how we know she's using the name of the covenant, right? How did she hear about it? Well, she has her little job, and a lot of men arrive there, right? There, somebody has to mention the God of Israel sooner or later. And so, excuse me, verse 10 goes on to say, we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for when you came out of Egypt, and when you did to Sihon and Og, the 2 kings of the Amorites east of the Jordan, who you completely destroyed. So there you can see in the red, I put the arrows there. It says the kingdom of Bashan, King Og, and then the kingdom of Ammon, King Sihon. Right, and then here in Numbers chapters, it'll mention them here, and here's a smaller one. Sihon, king of the Amorites, and Og, king of the Bashan, and all the kingdoms of Canaan. Right, so there it is in our Bible. These are not made-up stories from The Wizard of Oz or some other movie, right? So place your bet, right, on a winning team. Rahab correctly believed that the Hebrews would defeat Jericho because of God's power. She's heard about it. She didn't read about it, right? Somebody told her about it. So basically it was good versus evil. The one true God against these false gods. She believed the one true God would prevail because she's heard it before. And verse 11, it says, when we heard of it, our hearts melted. Remember that? Who remembers that? In Luke, right? Our hearts melted in fear, and everyone's courage failed because of you. For the Lord your God is God in heaven above and on earth below. So did Rahab have special information that other Jerichites did not have? No, they all heard of what the Lord had done for the Hebrews in Egypt. Her knowledge of the Lord was united with faith, while the rest of Jericho hardened their hearts and made up their minds to resist until the very end. They heard too what God had done, but they were resisting. Just like when we tell somebody the gospel, that Jesus is the way, they're resisting, and they're resisting to the very end. In her references to the Lord, she is technically using the unique divine name of God that was disclosed only to Israel, right? She utters this name several times. And though she names him as the Lord, notice that she says, your God. See that? Your God, as the Israelites' particular deity, right? She immediately confesses that he is God in heaven above and on earth below. I mean, that's just a confession right there. To even say that before another king of another, worship another deity, that's treason, right? So the irony is that she shows great faith in the power of this God, but she knows him only from rumors and stories of his might in wars on Israel's behalf. Now compare Rahab's hope and trust in this God with the Israelite, the Israelites' continual struggle with loyalty and trust in the Lord, even though they have seen, how God has been faithful to Israel. They have seen it up close, right? And they're still struggling when this woman had never seen it. She's only heard about it. She has stronger faith than even the Israelites or even these two spies at this particular moment, right? And so the book of Hebrew praises Rahab, while James also praises her works, right? The key is that, right? For all we are meant to know, she was merely a non-Israelite prostitute in a town that was basically going to be decimated, right? By God's wrath. And yet she could name it and claim it, right? With confidence and at a great risk, putting her trust in this foreign god. And so the Canaanites were very polytheistic, and they worshipped a variety of gods, right? And so Rahab affirms that Yahweh alone is God over all. And so when she said, the Lord your God, he is God, she is saying, in no uncertain terms, he is the only God, right? And so clearly Rahab was saying this for a reason than merely just to save her skin and that of her family, right? She was saying, our people worship dozens of gods, but your God alone is the one true God. Now, I know that some Christians have an issue with, the Bible says that God says, kill the women and the babies and the frogs and, whatever. But I'm going to tell you right now, that's what it says in our English translation. That's not what it says in the Greek. That's not what it says in the Hebrew. It doesn't say that. It only says to kill the troop soldiers. Okay, just giving you that. You can look that up yourselves. Okay, so verse 12, it goes on to say, now then, please swear to me by the Lord that you will show kindness to my family, because I have shown kindness to you. Give me a sure sign. And so here on top, we have the Hebrew and the Paleo-Hebrew. And this word truth is emet. Okay? And so if you take off the aleph out of emet, you get death. Okay? And so I think I have another slide that will show you that. So here it says, the Greek word aletheia literally means not concealed or unhiddenness. So in other words, for us, truth is a statement that we speak or that we read. But to the Greeks, truth meant something that's concealed, right? It's hidden. And so commentators point out that Rahab was proposing not just a deal, but rather a covenant, right, between herself and Israel. Now, covenant in our English would be, they would cut a covenant, right? We remember when God made the covenant with Abraham. God tells Abraham to cut the animals, the birds, right? And the inferior person was to walk between the cut pieces. But in this case, God makes Abram, right, or have a dream, and guess who's the one that's walking through the pieces? God manifests himself in fire, and he's the one going through the dead carcasses, right? In other words, God is saying, I am cut, and I'm going to demonstrate that through my son, Jesus Christ, so to speak. Fast forward. Who was the one that was cut and broken? Jesus, right? And so this Hebrew word translated solemn pledge is literally a true sign. Okay? Remember, the Jews require a sign, okay? According to Paul. So the sign is the oath pledge, right? So verse 13 goes on to say that you will spare the lives of my father and mother, my brothers and sisters, and all who belong to them, and that you will save us from death. And there it is, death, which is moot. Oh, here it is, this one. See? So there it says truth, aleph, gimel, hey, and then here, if you take off the aleph, which is the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, you get death, right? Thanatos, the god of death, right? Marvel, what's that guy's name? Thanos, or I don't know his name. But anyway, Rahab shows allegiance to Israel and therefore becomes part of Israel's family and ceases to be a Canaanite, right? She asked for the lives of her father's house to be spared. Jericho could have been spared destruction if it had demonstrated faith in God, casting itself upon God's mercy in the same way as the inhabitants of Nineveh, right? Or as did Rahab. So the inhabitants of Jericho presumably had the same opportunity basically to embrace Israel's God that Rahab did, but only she sees that opportunity, right? From what we have in the story. Only she and her family were spared the destruction. What does that remind us of? Noah, right? Destruction. So verse 14 goes on to say, "Our lives for your lives," the men assured her. "If you don't tell what we are doing, we will treat you kindly and faithfully when the Lord gives us the land." That's for sure. He's going to give us the land. It's not a maybe, right? Now, the word "you" in you do not report is plural, right? It is up to Rahab's entire family to keep quiet, right? The secrecy they desire is for Rahab to enable them to escape before anyone learns that they are still in Jericho, right? And for her to guarantee that escape by maintaining secrecy about it until they cross basically the Jordan River into safety. And verse 15 goes on to say, "So she let them down by a rope through the window, for the house she lived in was part of the city wall." And so the Greek Septuagint and the Vulgate by Jerome omit this parenthetical that we call remark about Rahab's house being in the wall. And so the exact nature of Rahab's house is very unclear. Now, some Bible versions place her house on the wall, like the King James, but the Hebrew has in the wall. So Rahab's family may have lived in one of these residences, right? Although her window must have been rather high. Serenata, right? High. Since she let the spies down using a rope. Now, perhaps the house was indeed atop of the wall, but built into the wall in such a way that it was considered an integral part of that wall, right? And so here we have some images, and we can see how these other walls, right, help against the enemy trying to go up, okay? And so this could be the ending of the wall, right, like the corner. And so, but, you know, archaeologists can't figure it out. And so all we have is what the Bible tells us and what some Hebrew words or Greek words can clarify. So verse 16 says, "She said to them, 'Go to the hill so the pursuers would not find you. Hide yourself there 3 days,'" 3 days, right? "'until they return, and then go on your way.'" And so Jebel Karantal here, the mountain, this is where Christians believe that Jesus was tempted on this mountain. It's a prominent mountain northwest of Jericho. The area is full of, crevices and caves that could provide a good hiding place. So perhaps this is the area where the spies could have hidden. So the key point is that the hill country is in the opposite direction as the Jordan River that the king's officer went to back in verse 7. So 17 and 18 say, "Now the men had said to her, 'This oath you made us swear will not be binding on us.' 18, "Unless, when we enter the land, you have tied this scarlet cord in the window through which you let us down, and unless you have brought your father and mother, your brothers, and all your family into this house." So the Hebrew used for a cord is different from the word used for the rope. Two different things. And so the crimson cord would never have held men of that weight, right? Some have suggested that the crimson cord was the ancient equivalent of a red light, right? So the suggestion has been made that this crimson, if it was rope, it would be this other word. But that's why I crossed it out, because it's not in the Greek. That's what it's telling us, it's scarlet, not this one. Okay? Taking a picture of it? Great. Okay, so I'm going to go to the next one. Okay, so you see a difference between the scarlet. And so, but the suggestion has been made that this crimson cord or thread probably refers to a strand of bright material from cloth, right, or woven cloth, which the spies could easily notice, right, as they're looking for it. In other words, it's a scarlet color, so you can see which are the prostitutes, where they're at or where their houses are, right? And so this other one here, I'm going to explain this. So what this is telling us, because of these words, it gets complicated. Now, Cyril of Alexandria, notice what he said, by camel, camelos, Jesus means not the living thing, the beast of burden, but the thick rope, right? Camelos. See, they're almost spelled alike, to which sailors tie their anchors. You know how when we say that Jesus said the camel has to go through the eye of the needle, okay? So what the scholars are saying, even these scholars back then, are saying, that's not what Jesus meant. The problem was that the translators, we have two words, camelos and camelos. One means camel and one means rope. So Jesus is actually talking about a rope that goes through the needle. That's another story. But just to give you an idea that words sometimes are very complicated in Hebrew and Greek. And so we have to know, was it a scarlet cord? Was it a rope? Or was it just some kind of string? Right? So that makes a big difference. So verse 19, 20, and 21 say, if any of them go outside your house in the street, their blood will be on their heads. We will not be responsible. As for those who are in the house with you, their blood will be on our head if a hand is laid on them. Verse 20, But if you tell what we are doing, we will be released from the oath you made us swear. 21, agreed, she replied. Let it be as you say. So she sent them away, and they departed, and she tied the scarlet cord in the window. Now, notice those words, let it be as you say. It's almost reminding us of Mary, right, in her response to the angel Gabriel. Let it be with me according to your word. So verse 15 may be a summary, right? So we don't need to assume that the discussion occurs while the men are being lowered, right? Because we tend to think that, oh, they're being lowered and they're making this deal as they're being lowered in verse 15. So verse 15 introduces what's going to happen with the details necessary to explain the reference to the window down in verse 18. And then verse 21 actually records it happening, right? So we don't know at what time this conversation took place. So Deuteronomy 7:2 says that the Israelites should not make a covenant with the Canaanites. That's why I have Deuteronomy there. So she wants a covenant with the Israelites when Deuteronomy 7:2 says you can't do that, right? The oath here seems to be an exception to that policy, right? So Rahab made a confession of faith in Israel's God, as noted above. This made her and the Israelites rather than, made her, an Israelite rather than a Canaanite now. And so the red rope, or the cord, whatever you want to call it, may or may not have been the same as the rope the spies were using when they were being lowered down. And so, can you get this last page? So this scholar by the name of Richard Hess, he wonders if it may have been used to advertise her house as a prostitute house, right? So the women, I like this image here, they would throw their red cord, rope, whatever you want to call it, so the men know where are the prostitutes. So that's what this scholar is saying, meaning it would not have drawn attention, right? Because if nobody is doing this and then somebody puts a rope there, well, something's going on here because this rope is never out here. And so if prostitutes were always doing this, oh, it's just natural. It's just a cord thrown out. And maybe they were different colors and hers was red, right? And so the only time the color of blood is specified in the Old Testament is the Old Testament word Adam, right? It's not this word Hassini, or we saw earlier, Hassani for red, right? And so this word sani, which means red, translated scarlet, is only used in connection with threads or fabrics, not blood. So when you hear them saying, oh, the blood of Jesus is the scarlet red, that's not what it's talking about here. And so the only time the color of blood is used with the word Adam in the Old Testament. And so nonetheless, commentators on the Bible regularly make the connection between the scarlet cord and blood. And they note it is only through blood, whether the blood of sacrificial animals or the blood of Christ, that redemption can come to anyone as it came to Rahab. And so a second parallel can be made here. They'll say that this is a remembrance of the Passover, right? At the first Passover, the Israelites put blood on the the doorposts and lintels of their homes as a sign for God. He was going to come through and destroy the firstborn Egyptians. So the Israelites were also not to leave their houses, right? So in the same way that scarlet cord was assigned to the Israelites, don't destroy the people that are in that house, because Rahab's family is in there. So as long as they stayed there and the symbol was there, they were going to be safe. Now, was it a symbol or a type of the shed blood of Christ? Probably not, right? As there's no reference to this anywhere in the Old Testament or in the New Testament, it should be noted that crimson is not a color ever used to describe blood in the Old Testament. So what is the cross-cultural insight here? Well, people that we go to are more informed than we think, right? Because they were going to the Canaanites and she knew a lot about their God. She had more faith than they did because she only heard the stories, they lived them, and they still were a little bit lacking in trusting God. So they may be ignorant of the specifics of the message or the method, but most have the general idea of what you represent, right? So they had, viewed and heard, read about your culture, your country, and your beliefs. So if they didn't do so before they met you, right, you're presenting the gospel, they're quickly going to Google you now because now they have the technology to do that. So whoever you're representing, an institution, organization, and you present yourself to them, they may not know a lot about you, but they know what you're coming for, right? And then once you leave, okay, I'm going to Google them, see if this is true, right? So I can know more about them. Now, a cross-cultural takeaway is, as a cross-cultural worker living in a foreign land, don't assume that people are clueless as to who you are or why you are there and the message you bring, especially in this age of technology. So even though this story, unlike Sarah and Hagar, Laban and Jacob, there was not a lot of intercultural communication, there was in fact here some cross-cultural. Because again, she was a Canaanite and these were Israelites, and she now makes a covenant with the God of Israel, right? She is no longer seen as a Canaanite, she is now a believer, and we know this because the New Testament has her name right on there. And she is in the genealogy. She would be Jesus' great times, 1,000 grandmother, so to speak. And so these are the movies I was mentioning the other day. So I went ahead and posted them. But I want you to see a difference that the ones on top are the Bible collection. The ones on the bottom here are the Bible stories, or sometimes the Bible series. So they're two different. But the best one, in my opinion, is Joseph. That's like 3 hours, and the acting and everything in it. I mean, I cried as a guy. If you're a guy, you're gonna cry. But I recommend it. They have them in Spanish too. Okay, some you buy them and then you can change it to Spanish. But the reason I like them is because they're very trying to be like it was in that particular time. So if you ever seen the Ten Commandments with Charlton Heston, he's very elegant, he speaks well. Well, that's not how we see him in the Bible. So Moses with Ben Kingsley, and this is Ben Kingsley, famous actor, right? In that movie, he's portrayed as the Bible says, he stutters, right? He can't speak well. And so that's what I like about these movies. They try it their best as they could. And now this one, Richard Gere, everybody knows the movie Pretty Woman. That's him before he was that famous. This is to me the best King David movie I've seen, and I've seen a bunch. But this one, the portrayal when he's young and Saul and all the actors, oh my God, it's great from my perspective, right? And so that ends our session. Comments or questions? Comments or questions? While I take a drink of water. Email. Christian without the H, just like the word Christian without the H. Y, the letter Y. That's my Hebrew name, Yair. It means teacher. It literally means enlightened, but the ones that enlighten are the teacher. Then Cervantes, like servant. Cervantes. Cervantes. Hotmail.com. Christian White, Cervantes, hotmail.com.
In working with the Afghan ladies, trying to teach them English, we have found out that sometimes their husbands object because they know what our object is.
There you go. They know. They're prepared.
We try to stress the Old Testament stories, which hopefully they are somewhat familiar with.
Very good.
But hopefully present them in a different way than they're used to hearing. And we always present God as a loving God who cares about you, which I think is very different than the way they see God.
Right, exactly. Very good.
But it's a fine line.
I took a class from a professor, ex-Muslim, and what he said is, what you need to do if you're going to try to, bring the gospel to a Muslim is, you have to use their Bible, their Quran, right? And what you do with the Quran is and we went through it, like literally. And what you try to do is you try to make Jesus more important in the Quran, even if it's their type version of Jesus. You have to make him more important than Muhammad. So for example, if you say, well, what does Jesus say about, family life? Well, in the Quran. Oh, Jesus says this. What does Muhammad say? He doesn't say anything about it. And you just keep, the questions. And you'll see that Jesus is like this much, and Muhammad is about this much. What's the point? Well, the point is, as Christians, we pray, right, for them, because the idea is that he goes home thinking, Muhammad didn't really say much. Jesus said more. So when he's at home going to bed, that's when we pray, the Lord is working, that he may say, I wonder what else Jesus says in that other book, right, which they call the people of the book. And so that's the idea. And so when I took that class, it was awesome class because we literally dissected that Quran. Okay. Now, Muslims do not accept English Qurans. They will only accept it Arabic. Okay. So comments or questions? Anything? No? Okay. So tomorrow's our last class. In this story, we didn't see a well, but tomorrow we'll see about that well. Remember, I kept saying, remember the well. Okay. So let me end with a word of